Then it really hit me. I'm on the moon. I'm on the moon. And the excitement, the wonder, the thrill, the adventure of it all.
The real reason
The real reason we never went back to the moon has nothing to do with budget cuts, politics, or lack of interest. The real reason has been kept quiet for over 50 years. And the man revealing it isn't some anonymous whistleblower hiding behind a screen name. Music. His name is Charles Duke, the 10th human being to walk on the lunar surface, an Air Force brigadier general, the voice that guided Neil Armstrong through humanity's first moon landing. In April 1972, during Apollo 16, Duke and his commander found something in the Descartes Highlands that was not supposed to be there. They radioed Houston and described what they were seeing, and Houston went silent. Not the normal signal delay. A long, deliberate, chilling silence. When the response finally came, it wasn't a question. It was an order. Move on. Duke followed that order for 40 years. He kept his mouth shut. He protected the secret. But now, at 89 years old, he's done staying quiet. And his explanation is terrifying. The astronaut. To understand why this man stayed silent for 4 decades, you need to understand what kind of man he is. Duke doesn't scare easily. He joined NASA in 1966 and was immediately recognized as one of the sharpest, most unshakable pilots in the entire program. A start at home on the 8th day. And on the 9th day, we had a spacewalk, or EVA, and we were about 180,000 miles from the Earth. Before NASA, he was flying some of the most advanced fighter jets in the Air Force inventory. Precision was his language. Facts were his religion. This was not a man prone to imagination or exaggeration. His voice was the last thing Armstrong and Aldrin heard before touching down on the Sea of Tranquility during Apollo 11. That famous exchange where he tells them a bunch of guys on the ground were about to turn blue from holding their breath. That was Duke. Cool, steady, the kind of man who doesn't flinch when the entire world is watching and 2 lives depend on his composure. 3 years later, he got his own mission, Apollo 16. He and Commander John Young launched on April 16, 1972, and spent 71 hours on the lunar surface, longer than almost any crew before them. Their landing site was the Descartes Highlands, a rugged ancient region of the moon that scientists believed held volcanic origins. They drove the lunar rover for miles across barren terrain that no human eyes had ever seen, collected geological samples from craters and ridge lines, ran every experiment on the checklist. The mission was supposed to answer straightforward scientific questions about the moon's geological history, nothing more. He picked out a landing spot, stopped this forward the velocity, and then lower the lunar module. NASA called it one of the most successful Apollo flights ever. Every objective met, every box checked, flawless. At least that's the official version. But here's the deal. If you go back and watch the raw, unedited mission footage, not the highlight reels, the full uncut recordings, something isn't right. There are moments where Duke just freezes mid-sentence, mid-step, completely still. His body language changes. He stops moving entirely and stares at something beyond the camera's frame. Something the lens never captures. You hear Young's voice crackle through the radio. "Charlie, okay?" A long pause. The kind of pause that feels deliberate. Then Duke, barely audible. Yeah, I'm fine. Just looking." His voice sounds different. Distracted, like a man trying to process something his training never prepared him for. Looking at what the transcripts don't say, the post-mission reports don't mention it, and Duke wouldn't talk about it for decades. But when he finally started speaking publicly around 2015, what he described didn't just challenge NASA's official story. It demolished it. The anomalies, the first thing was the light. Sunlight on the moon should be pure white. No atmosphere means no scattering. That's textbook physics. But Duke said sometimes he saw colors that had no business being there. Blues, purples, not reflections off equipment or the visor. The light itself was colored. He'd look away, look back, and it would be different. Shifting on a world where nothing is supposed to change. And get this, he heard sounds on the moon, where sound is physically impossible. Music, not through the radio, not mechanical vibrations from the suit. Tones, frequencies, sometimes harmonic, almost musical, sometimes dissonant, and deeply unsettling. He turned to Young and asked if he could hear it, too. Young said yes. Two of the most rigorously trained test pilots in human history, experiencing something that violates the laws of physics, and they never reported it, because who would believe them? But it gets worse. Duke described time itself behaving erratically. He'd be working on a task, check his suit timer, and 20 minutes had vanished. Subjectively, it felt like 2. Other times, 5 minutes on the clock stretched into what felt like an hour. Young experienced the same thing. Their subjective sense of time never once matched the mission clock during the entire surface day. Then there was the presence. Duke said every astronaut who walked on the moon felt it, a sensation of being watched. Not by Houston, not by each other. Something else, something vast and aware. He described it as overwhelming by a 3M pole. So 10 feet away was this biological experiment. So he climbs out and then is working on this experiment with his back to me. Not hostile exactly, but inescapable, like something enormous was studying them, the way you'd study an insect that just crawled onto your hand. And it wasn't intermittent. It was constant from the moment they stepped onto the surface until the moment they sealed the hatch to leave, watching, waiting, patient beyond any human understanding of patience. Strange lights that shifted on their own. Sounds in a vacuum where sound cannot physically exist. Time that refused to obey the clock, stretching and compressing in ways that made no sense. The feeling of being observed by something you can't see, can't name, can't explain, something ancient and impossibly patient. Duke and Young experienced all of it on the same mission. They compared notes privately, their experiences matched, and they told absolutely no one. Stay with me here. Because everything I just described, the lights, the sounds, the time distortions, the presence, that's not what kept Duke silent for 40 years. That's not the reason we stopped going to the moon. Those anomalies were disturbing. Yes, unexplainable. But they were subjective experiences, hard to prove. Easy for NASA to dismiss as stress or disorientation. What comes next is different. What comes next is physical, concrete, photographed. And it's the reason we never went back. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now, because what Duke found on that ridge in the Dart Highlands changes everything. The structures. Duke and Young were 6 kilometers from the lunar module, far side of a ridge where the Earth wasn't even visible in the sky above them. Just the two of them, the rover, an endless gray desolation stretching to a razor-sharp horizon. They were supposed to be collecting geological samples, routine work, methodical, boring even by moonwalk standards, the kind of task you do on autopilot while your mind wanders. Then Duke looked up toward the horizon, and everything changed. But this is where it gets wild. The structures themselves aren't even the most disturbing part. It's their age. In 2019, an interviewer asked Duke if the structures looked recent. Duke shook his head slowly. No. That's what makes this terrifying. He said they were eroded, worn down in ways that shouldn't be possible on an airless world. Even though there's no wind on the moon, no rain, music, no weather of any kind, these structures bore the unmistakable marks of deep time, covered in micrometeorite impact craters, the kind that only accumulate over millions of years of constant bombardment from space, music possibly hundreds of millions of years. They predated anything humans have ever built. Duke paused. A long, heavy pause. They predated humans entirely. Whatever intelligence constructed those walls, whatever hands or tools shaped those blocks, they did it long before our species even existed on Earth. Who built them? Duke's answer came barely above a whisper. I don't know, but someone or something was constructing on the moon long before our species existed. And NASA knows music, and they decided the public shouldn't. Ancient structures on the moon, photographed, reported in real time. Music. And Houston's response was deliberate silence, followed by an order to move on. But Duke wasn't the only Apollo astronaut carrying this weight. And what the others eventually revealed decades later makes his account almost impossible to dismiss. The others. In 2017, most of the surviving Apollo moonwalkers gathered for a private reunion. Picture this. A quiet room. Old men, gray-haired, slow-moving. Most of them in their 80s, the only human beings alive who had ever stood on another world. Men who had once been the boldest explorers in human history, now gathered with the weight of decades pressing down on their shoulders. For years, each had carried the same burden completely alone, the same silence, the same unanswered questions that woke them at 3 o'clock in the morning. And according to Duke, that reunion was the first time any of them finally said it out loud. Everyone had anomalies, Duke said. Different things, different missions. But nobody's experience matched what NASA told the public. And we all knew we couldn't talk about it. Not because NASA explicitly threatened them, because no one would have believed them. They'd have been called senile delusional. So they stayed quiet, every last one of them for decades, until they were old enough that reputation no longer mattered more than the truth. And get this, Duke wasn't the only one who eventually broke that silence publicly. Buzz Aldrin, the second human being to walk on the moon. A man whose name is synonymous with the Apollo program itself. In later interviews, Aldrin's eyes would go distant, his voice dropping to something measured and careful as he described a monolith-like object on Phobos, one of Mars' moons. He didn't hedge. He didn't laugh it off or treat it as speculation. He looked directly into the camera and said it warranted serious, immediate investigation. The man who stood beside Armstrong at Tranquility Base, who punched a conspiracy theorist in the face for calling him a liar, asking the world to pay attention to something deeply strange on another moon entirely. Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14. He walked on the lunar surface in February 1971 and came back a fundamentally changed man. In his later years, Mitchell would lean forward in interviews, voice steady, eyes locked with unshakable certainty, and music state plainly that extraterrestrial intelligence is real, that governments know, that the evidence is overwhelming, and has music been for decades. Interviewers tried to soften it, offered him easy exits. Mitchell never took one. He'd just repeat it, calmer each time, firmer, like a man who'd made peace with a truth the world wasn't ready for. Al Worden's Apollo 15. He orbited the moon while his crewmates explored the surface below. In one interview, Worden sat back, arms folded, and stated music flatly that he believed humans descended from beings who came from somewhere else, not Earth. The interviewer laughed nervously. Music wardens didn't even blink. Here's the part nobody talks about. These weren't conspiracy theorists posting from their basement. These were decorated military officers and PhD-level scientists. Men hand-selected from thousands of candidates and entrusted with the most complex and dangerous missions ever attempted. Men with everything to lose by speaking up. A.